AAD sessions. Tonight's event is hosted by CUBE, which is the Centre for Urban and Built Ecologies at London Metropolitan University, and I'm the director of CUBE. CUBE is our community of researchers in all aspects of the making and interpretation of places. Our subjects range from architecture, urbanism, and design of objects, interiors, and environments. Please do follow our activity on our website and via social media. I'm not going to drive tonight's vehicle. That I'm going to hand over in a moment to our chair for the evening, who is Kay Newman, and Kay will lead us through the discussion and introduce the speakers. Kay Newman is Head of Architecture and Design at London Metropolitan University. The common thread through her design career has been themes surrounding connections between user and client, between public and private space. The point of this is to preserve the integrity of each, but improve the continuity of flow and movement between them through an empathetic, aesthetic, and reflective approach and design philosophy. She has developed this theme as the underlying quality underpinning her courses, which include interior design, the entire program of teaching in this field at London Metropolitan. So over to you, Kay, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Matthew, and welcome everyone to this evening's session event on anthropotropic architecture, human well-being at the heart of design. I'd like to firstly introduce our two speakers. Firstly, can I say hello to Philomena Reinmuller, who now practices in San Francisco in California, previously attaining an MA in architecture at London Met, followed by earning an engineering degree at Stanford University earlier this year. Philomena's research and design practice are driven by the idea of anthropotropic architecture, an architecture that is responsive to the social, mental, and physical needs of the community that occupy it. And next, if I could introduce Natasha Reed, who studied architecture at Cambridge University and gained a distinction for her professional diploma here at London Met. Natasha is the founder of Matter, Space, Soul as a response and action to her experiences in professional practice over the last 10 years. Natasha is a healthy places and inclusive design expert for 2 London boroughs, review panels, a former fellow with the Centre for Conscious Design, and an associate with the Quality of Life Foundation. So just to say something very small before we start, the practice of building new environments consumes years of rethinking about the redevelopment of areas and is heavily influenced through current agendas, social and economic. Often when developments are completed, society and thinking has moved on. But surely what is constant is the experience of the people within, the community that it serves, and recognizing them as part of its vitality, its outward presence to others, and ultimately its success as a sustainable community. Thinking on a human scale, that vanishing point of perspective and the connection to the materials and how they wrap the environment and their relationship to the human psyche and perception is surely the very thing that fosters belonging, enterprise, and a positive longevity. The position of the designer architect is empathetic. It involves being aware of the theatre of the commonplace and sits between the function and the industry. So enough from me. So I would now like to ask Philomena to present her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai, for the introduction. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, that's...
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So, anthropotropism is the principle that technologies work better when they respect human nature. And this concept is commonly associated with Paul Levinson, who is a media and communications professor and science fiction author. And he believed that if anthropotropic principles are driving technology evolution, that eventually all technologies are reshaped to conform to human physical attributes and cognitive structures. And in that way, they become extensions of the self. An example for anthropotropism applied to technology is the evolution of the computer mouse. So as we can see in the picture, over time, the shape of the mouse became more responsive to the shape of the human hand, and perhaps even also to the way humans think and the brain is working. And then gradually the experience of using the computer mouse was improved, and the mouse became more of an extension of the human self. And even though the concept is applied in technology, it can really be applied to anything that is human, like human created, or created by humans, or in our control. And it can even be applied to a presentation like this, or to architecture. And obviously, it will be more complex to apply this concept to architecture. But again, architecture is human. It's something that is created by humans. So let us say that if we take Paul Levinson's perspective and apply it to architecture, that would mean that if anthropotropic principles were driving the evolution of architecture, eventually all architecture would be shaped to conform to human nature and be extensions of the self. So what I will be presenting today is going to be an excerpt of my thinking in relation to the concept of anthropotropic architecture. And the framework is still a work in progress, and I'm still very much at the beginning of really understanding what it is and how it could be applied to practice. And yeah, there are so many layers to it, and I think it can go into so many dimensions and directions. And so sometimes I'm finding myself getting a little bit lost in the complexity of the idea, but I'm really so excited for the opportunity to present today and to share some of my perspectives with you. I've always been interested in working with humans, and I think my interest in the concept anthropotropic architecture is just a natural expression of that interest. I was also inspired by human-centered design and systems thinking approaches in engineering, specifically while I was at Stanford, where these approaches partially originate. And I wanted to explore the elements of these problem-solving processes and how they could be applied to architectural practice to make architecture work better for humans. Architecture wasn't a calling for me. It was more serendipitous. When I was 19, I had just dropped out of a biochemistry program and had come to the conclusion that I don't want to try to be admitted to medicine school anymore. So I always thought I would become a doctor. And then in this last state, I just asked my dad what he thinks I should do, and he said architecture. So I did. And I went to architecture school and eventually began to like it. And now I'm trying to figure out where and how I can fit in, again, with my special interest in working with humans. And with architecture, I've also always felt this tension of what is and what could be. And I think it was also this tension, sort of a combination of frustration, I guess, and imagination or wonder that made me question on what basis we make design decisions in architecture today. And that also motivated me to explore possible ways to get closer to the quote unquote what could be. And in that sense, I think the deeper motivation that's driving me to develop this framework is to elevate the desire to elevate the human experience with the built environment. So again, my concept and framework is not fully developed yet, and what I will be sharing is an excerpt of my thinking and a part of what I've been researching during my engineer's degree program in sustainable design and construction at Stanford. And my intention with this presentation and anthropotropic architecture is really to raise aspirations and frame opportunities to maybe even get better at what we're already doing in regards to promoting well-being in the built environment by putting people even more into the center of design. And to conclude my preamble, I want to invite everyone today to think with me and get a little bit lost and to perhaps see new paths in a wide open sea of opportunities or opportunity in the context of well-being in the built environment and anthropotropic architecture. So we are in my car now on the way to figuring out what anthropotropic architecture is. And while we're sitting in this traffic jam, I'll share my thoughts about current architectural practice and where I think it falls short and where it can get better. So I might be wrong, but in my perspective and experience, it seems that anthropotropic principles are currently not driving the evolution of architecture. In my experience, buildings are designed to be responsive to checklists, to design standards, or efficiency goals and performance targets, and instead of being responsive to the experiences and needs of the people who actually use a building or space. And I don't mean to say that architects don't think about the end user when they design. I just think that those considerations are overpowered by other factors that are rendered as more important. And design decisions about the end user are most of the time based on assumptions and best guesses about the end user and on very little data or superficial data, for example, data on demographics. And the problem I see with existing well-being guidelines and frameworks is that they reference evidence from lab studies or studies conducted on a sample population where findings are generalized and don't account for differences in people. So there's this missing understanding of what is actually, not superficially, required in a specific context and a specific population. And it's this, see it as this missing connector and piece of research that would allow designers to choose design responses that specifically address and respond to the needs and experiences of the end user. So now we are in the park pondering this missing connector and missing research piece. For architecture to become anthropotropic, it's critical to avoid assumptions about those who will be living or using a building, living in or using a building. And I think this term, no one size fits all, really describes it very well. And I think it's critical to understand differences and specificities of people and really understand their emotional, mental, physical, and social differences and backgrounds and experiences, and let this understanding guide the design. And so it becomes critical to measure the outcomes that are experienced and felt by the end user, and also to measure the impact of design that takes those factors into account. So therefore, I'm developing, or I'm in the process of developing a process that is designed to draw out those specifics, pre-occupancy. And in my work and research, I'm describing this process as pre-occupancy evaluation or pre-occupancy experience assessment. And with this process, I really seek to understand how people interact emotionally with the build design and what has contributed to or compromised their well-being in relation to it. And I'm trying to understand the underlying characteristics that will support individuals' well-being. So, for example, things like intimacy, privacy, personal choice, aesthetics, hospitality, etc. And then I identify patterns and design decisions that can be implemented based on their feedback. And I also ask questions about specific attributes in the building or environment to seek specific feedback on them. And I consider individual level factors to understand where people are coming from and what has shaped their experiences, and also really understanding, what their background is. And so, it's not about simply asking people what they want or need. It's really about trying to understand who they are and asking about their experiences and feelings in relation to a built space and in relation to specific design attributes. And evaluation methods that I have used in projects so far were surveys and focus groups, but they can also include one-on-one interviews, naturalistic observations, ethnography, walkthroughs, and on-site meetings with the end user. That really depends on the context of the project and the research question that one is trying to answer. And quantitative data, for example, occupancy sensor data could also be included in those pre-occupancy evaluations and mixed with qualitative data to achieve greater or more robust insight. And of course, sample size, the sample sizes are also important to have statistically significant results and to be able to identify patterns in the data. So while we're back inside, I will share a little bit about my practical experiences so far of implementing the pre-occupancy evaluation. I'm fortunate to work with a really amazing client and was asked to conduct a pre-occupancy evaluation for a housing project for vulnerable populations. And the evaluation, pre-occupancy evaluation, included the research design, data collection, and analysis of the findings, identifying key findings about current and future spaces, and then identifying specific design recommendations and responses for each of these key findings. And talking about key findings and design responses, the evaluation I did in this project uncovered some subpar experiences of the future residents and in response influenced design decisions that had been made earlier without the user input. And for example, did the research lead to the decision to increase the square footage that was given to each occupant because the evaluation showed or uncovered that people feel cramped in their current spaces. It also uncovered the need for more storage spaces that are more conducive to hosting, and the preference for, and that's a very specific finding, the preference for a shower tub combination as opposed to a shower or a tub, among other things. And now that we're getting closer to the Christmas break, I will wrap up with some brief reflections about the challenges and opportunities I see with anthropotropic architecture. So a major challenge of pre-occupancy evaluation as this critical element is that it does increase the length of the design process, but I think that there's so much value in doing it, as also my practical experience has shown me, and it's an opportunity to avoid spending resources on the wrong things and avoid mistakes later on in the design process. And I think that it's a reasonable point to make, and I hope that the more practical experience I gather, the more I can validate this point. And if insights from those pre-occupancy evaluations are shared in an accessible way and maybe even re-evaluated post-occupancy, they can also benefit future projects that are similar. And the more data becomes available, the more we can maybe cultivate an understanding of different user groups or occupant types and what their needs and preferences and requirements are. And that then in turn could also help to make pre-occupancy evaluations more efficient over time, as more and more patterns may be identified and data about occupant types could get more robust. So in a nutshell, I propose pre-occupancy evaluations as a critical element of anthropotropic architecture, and this, like a new element in the design process. And with pre-occupancy evaluations, I see this opportunity to put people into the center of design and make well-being oriented practices in architecture more place-based and responsive, not only to human nature, but also to those who will actually use it. And with that, I want to close off with the following quote: "The ability for us to change things lies in our ability to imagine it." And if anyone finds my ideas interesting and wants to talk more about it, or talk more about my research or my work, or really anything else, they can contact me on LinkedIn. And the song that's playing in the background is called "The Passage of Forms" by Roy Montgomery. And with that, thank you so much for watching and listening.
Thank you, Philomena. Sorry, for a moment I'd lost my mouse. So thank you very, very much for that presentation. So if we can go straight across to Natasha for your presentation, please.
Great, I'll just share my screen. That come up? Yes, great. Yeah, it's a pleasure to join you all here this evening. I'm going to be talking about something called the place quality model, and that's a new approach for putting human well-being at the heart of how places are made. So very similar in ethos to Philomena's work, and I'll talk about the story of this particular piece of work, which is quite recent, but rooted in the sort of last 10 years of trying to do things differently, I suppose. So what is it? It's a new approach. It's partly a framework, but also there's an aspect of sort of dealing with systems and trying to create systems change. So it's an approach that aims to embed health, social well-being, and inclusivity into places by prioritizing human needs, human nature, and human experience. And this is a model that's been adopted within a London Borough's planning requirement, so the London Borough of Brent, in summer this year. So this is quite new. And it changes essentially the way that new developments, particularly residential developments, are now expected to be designed for planning permission, and it's going to shape the way that they're assessed. And the idea is to put how places impact people front and centre of that process. And I'll explain how this all works and what is sort of the different facets of it. But essentially it's creating a sort of first in its kind set of requirements. And we've just found out we've been successful in getting some funding to do an academic evaluation of this over the next 12 months to see what the changes are in terms of the design of developments that come through and impacts on people and health. So that'll be really interesting to see. So I'm going to talk first a little bit about my journey and background, going from more traditional architecture practice to, in the last 10 years, more research-informed design, to then how that then got to be sort of applied in local government and in planning. I'll talk a bit about this new place quality approach, how does it work in a bit of detail, and what is different. And then I'll end on how, well, what I'm looking to in terms of the future and how to see change, because what we're talking about today is not the norm, it's not mainstream, and talking about how to sort of aim to catalyse more collective action amongst the work and research that many people in this space are doing. So my journey, as I said, I've sort of trained and practiced in architecture. I worked in a really great practice. We're all very sort of interested in human experience and all these things, but I felt very limited by the wider industry, not necessarily the profession, but the context that we were working in, where these things about how places were affecting people, how we could make them better, was often not really valued, sometimes by clients or just the situations we're in. And I found that really frustrating, because for me, it's sort of the reason why, why I think architecture is so brilliant. It's about improving or supporting, improving people's lives and supporting people to thrive and flourish through the environments that we can create. So I took the decision to step away from traditional practice and started doing more research-based work, quite experimental, going more deeply into that human dimension of places. I actually started off by doing socially engaged art practice, and then that led to looking at themes of sort of how people, the sense of kind of displacement of people in cities, or quite different types of topics that you would in a conventional practice. And that led me to finding out about environmental psychology, which is a whole discipline about how the spaces around you affect how you feel, how you behave, and also ended up discovering work that's been happening in neuroscience about how our environments affect our brains and can affect our levels of stress or how attached we feel to a place. There's all this work that's happening that never really makes it into the practice of design in the large part in the mainstream. But now there is more awareness now than 10 years ago about how our surroundings affect how we feel, how we interact, how people behave, how these things contribute to a sense of community, sense of place and identity and belonging. And all of these things together, these human dimensions, impact people's quality of life, people's health and well-being. And in public health, the sort of public health world, it's fairly well known that the built environment is one of the factors that contributes to people's health. There's something called the wider determinants of health, or the social determinants of health, which cover things from lifestyle to your environment, the housing you're in, the wider neighbourhoods. And these are all things that can impact us in different ways in terms of health. But generally, there's a consensus that current practices of urban design and planning are not sufficient to protect and improve people's health. And generally, there's an understanding that's developing that there's many people whose needs are not being met by current design and planning. And there's lots of different aspects to that. So I've been looking at health, but also things like tackling loneliness and social connection. This falls under this, and that's something I've done quite a lot of work around. But the way that our buildings and our surroundings are formed can either enable or disable social connection, and loneliness and isolation is considered to be as high a risk factor for mortality of smoking. So there's more and more kind of awareness about this, and there's more interest in how the built environment can actually contribute to these wider issues. So in my own practice, I've developed an ethos which is called urban empathy. So it's nice to hear Kate speaking about empathy at the start as well. And sort of simply put, it's about making places to fit people and not the other way around, as it seems to be sometimes, and shaping places from the inside out. So for me, that means understanding how places affect us as individuals and as communities, and then also drawing from all this research that exists in different disciplines, including things like anthropology, as well as neuroscience and psychology, and starting to bring that into the way that places are shaped. So pre-pandemic, I'd created a framework for design for myself and my own practice around human experience, and that starting point being human needs and human nature. Because essentially when we create our built environments, we're creating our habitats, and surely we should be shaping that from the way that's going to benefit us as human creatures the best. So fast forward, we then have the pandemic, and then sort of so much more understanding of how what's around us is affecting us. And post-pandemic, the opportunity to work within a local council, Brent Council, through something called public practice, which is a scheme that places different professionals from the built environment into local government. And most of the time, there's a lot of architects that do that. And the idea is to bring different skills, but also to drive change. So Brent is the 5th largest London borough. It's experiencing very, very high growth. This is a picture from around Wembley. A lot of development happening, and they were looking for some new guidance to sort of help shape this in response to this shift in priorities with the pandemic. So I'll share a bit more in detail about the approach, the place quality framework, and how it works. So firstly, sort of similarly to the first presentation, it's very much about human experience and prioritizing this and people-focused outcomes. So it's about moving away from the status quo that is often there, about focusing on the physical factors of places, whether that's numbers of homes or visual appearance or form. And it's about going beyond that and going to the qualitative side of space and the human factors. So there's that human experience and outcomes. And essentially what the new guidance does is to reframe design quality, or what's considered good design from a local government planning perspective, to be about that human experience of place. And that covers a very wide range of topics because it is very complex. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing is trying to sort of capture that in a way that makes it accessible for different types of people. But it covers things from people's physical and mental well-being, enabling social connection, building strong communities, encouraging inclusivity and mixing between different generations, supporting a sense of place and belonging, and starting to think about how can we actually empower people through place and through the process. And I essentially brought the work that I'd done in terms of a human experience kind of design framework and brought that to Brent and started to shape some of the work around that to specific local issues. So it's a borough that, like much of London, there's areas of affluence, but also deprivation, a lot of health inequalities, issues with social cohesion, a lot of people from different sort of cultural backgrounds. So along with different challenges, there was huge opportunities for positive change in this place. And this new approach now applies to all residential developments across a really wide range of scales. So it's creating new requirements from the scale of a master plan to consider firstly, who are those users and what are their needs, to the buildings, the internal spaces, the interiors, external spaces like gardens, courtyards, and public spaces around that. So it's really across the scales from that strategic all the way down to the human sort of scale details. And the three areas that it's starting to break down into in terms of impact on quality of life is health and well-being. So the first area, community and belonging, and then vibrant and inclusive places. And this work starts to also look at the benefits, the sort of co-benefits that you have in terms of sustainability with nature and providing green infrastructure and tying that in as well. So sort of well-being in a broader sense. And the way that this works, and ideally will work for other areas and other places, is that it requires a contextual approach for design. So that there's a system that's set up to ask designers to respond to the context, particularly if there are things lacking in terms of quality of life. So if there are places of open space deficiency, so that's a map on the left, there'll be higher requirements to actually deliver on the quality of life through different factors. And similarly, if it's an area of deprivation, again, there'll be much higher requirements to respond to the level of disadvantage and need in that place. So to give a sense of all the different parts of it, this is the sort of overview. It's each of the three areas breaks down into three different quality of life criteria, and I'll show a bit about what that contains without sort of going into too much detail. But the idea is this creates a way to bridge the gap between a lot of research and evidence that exists and start to bring that into practical application. So how will this change be achieved? And it brings together lots of different areas, and it's not a kind of tick box checklist framework. It's a way to generate new solutions, and I'll show you how that works. But it's about addressing quality of life in a structured way. So in these three areas, there's different aspects, and some of them it starts with more kind of baseline practice, which is more expected, whether that's creating comfortable spaces, relaxing spaces, distinctive places, or safe spaces. And then there are different levels that go up to things that are a little bit more exceptional and considered leading practice. So whether that's places that are empowering for people because they've been involved in the design, or places for different user needs. So whether that's responding to particularly the needs of, say, older people or women or children or people that are neurodiverse. So there's a sort of spectrum there of different considerations. And these different areas break down into a whole series of sort of design considerations, which are all essentially from the human experience perspective. And that creates a series of prompts to help shape the design, really from the first principles. And I'll show a couple of those things. But essentially, thinking of this from a sort of systemic point of view, the new guidance within Brent creates a requirement for designers to actually put together a place quality statement using all the prompts in the framework to show very specifically in drawings and in the design what is the benefits to people and communities. So that creates a shift, and that's a kind of new thing. So we're going to see how, what the response is, what the changes over time. And the idea is this can also empower the designers that are already doing some of these things, or most of these things. It gives them the backing to say, we should be doing these things, and it's now required when there's sometimes pushback from clients. And I wanted to sort of emphasize that it's covering lots of different areas because often things are quite interconnected. So this is a quote from Campaign to End Loneliness. And they said, what makes social connection develop well or not is often found in the details, the perfect spot for a bench that's nice for a chat, and the shared space that's not used because it's dark. So if you're thinking about social connection, there's also aspects of safety, there's aspects of comfort, how are the places good for different types of people or welcoming to them so that they actually get used. So it's sort of about thinking about these things together and not in silos. So I'll just show what's in the model and this framework, just to give a sense of it, because there's quite a lot. So these are some of the aspects around health and well-being. And these are essentially design prompts and asking questions, starting with this: is it a comfortable, active or relaxing place? Will it feel peaceful or lively, given the type of space it is and the time of day? Is it an attractive, restorative, natural place? How are the benefits of green and tranquil spaces being maximised? So there's a whole series of sort of things to think about. And then the leading practice around this are residents' communities involved in co-design or engagement beyond normal consultation. And there's examples in here of different types of spaces that have benefits around health and well-being. For example, the image on the bottom, it's got playable kind of sensory landscaping in terms of visual amenity or attractive spaces. And the next kind of section around community and belonging similarly has different kind of questions, starting from, is it a distinctive place? Does it support sort of pride of place or common sense of identity? Is it a sociable place? Does the design encourage people to spend time there? And there are sort of prompts without kind of trying to prescribe things, but saying things like, are there features that encourage dwelling? So reasons to stay and pause. And again, lots of examples about, very simply, is it places where there are benches that face other people so you can see some activity, and quite simple things to places where you might be able to sit and get to know your neighbours and build stronger relationships, all the way through to sort of more developed ways of building community, so having spaces for gatherings and mixing generations, or even things like community gardening, where people are sort of working together, interacting. And this is just a slide to sort of show that it's all these things that can be done, and not necessarily about how much is being spent on a project or the levels of sort of finish, but it's often just about the quality of the space in terms of how people move through, or what you see, if you see other people, things like natural light and spaciousness. And then lastly, to sort of wrap up, the last part is about creating vibrant and inclusive places. And here I've put lots of the kind of prompts in there just to kind of show the extent of it. but there's questions around safety, kind of more baseline. Is it they're clear sort of fronts and backs? Is the space designed to feel welcoming to the people using it? And then sort of the next level is the space inclusive to different types of people with dignity for all? The opportunity for people from different walks of life to meet? And then going really deeply into user needs, whether that's young people or older people, and asking designers to sort of think, okay, does this go beyond creating places for everyone, to give consideration to really specific user needs, and how's that being done? And a lot of these, you know, there's examples already of really good architecture and projects that are tackling some of these issues. But this is more exceptional rather than the standard. So this is a relatively new project, social housing for older people, where, for example, they've got wider corridors where people can sit, and just that has that aspect of sociability. So the idea is really to just shift things towards this becoming the norm across different factors. And so having done that in sort of public sector, what I'm doing now is implementing some of those principles through design of new projects. Now that there's a lot more interest in that, which is great. But actually that human experience being the foundation for design in the first step, and that drives the whole design. So I'll just end now with a couple of points about the long-term aims, which is very much about systemic change, ideally. This is a first step, and it's about putting people front and center of both the design and urban planning process to be able to make that change. The hope is to be able to prioritize quality of life as a matter of course in the way that place is being shaped, shifting towards human experience, empathy, and emotion, how we feel, as the foundation for design, and making what is currently exceptional the everyday. Oh yeah, sorry, this is the last slide. And more generally, I'm looking at how this can act as a sort of prototype to bring together lots of different research that's happening, different organisations, to start to develop this unified and collaborative structured approach for embedding quality of life and building this out with different people to try and catalyse that change. So we can shift from built environments that potentially neglecting health, connectedness, and inclusivity to human environments that are about creating places from the inside out, starting with how they affect people and communities. So that's it. And if you're interested to find out more, my email is on this slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Really nice presentation, both very, very comprehensive presentations. So I guess we're going to go to questions now, and I'll start them off, but please, anybody, please do ask some questions, and maybe Matthew and Harriet could also enter into this question asking. Right, so Philomena, I'm going to ask how, when you look at a survey of a site and location, how do you what's the word? I think write the questions or prepare the questions for the answers. Because we're used to questionnaires and people are used to being asked their views, but how do you rephrase the questions so that you do get that emotional, empathetic response from them, that response that asks them about their feelings? Have you reframed those questions?
Yeah, I think one thing that I definitely try to avoid is asking people about how satisfied they are with something. It's more about asking questions like, rate how you think how much the space positively contributes to your well-being. And I think if we just avoid, because standard post-occupancy evaluations always ask about satisfaction, they always measure satisfaction. And I'm just trying to find out, I go from broad to more detailed. So at the beginning, I always try to find out, yeah, how they, what's their experience, how do they feel the space impacts their emotional well-being, and then I also work with things like kind of, I call it an experience, it's an experience wheel where people can just, on the wheel, there's different experiences around it, and then they can just kind of rate where they feel the space or whatever I'm trying to assess, if it's a space or a building, they can rate how much they relate the specific emotion to the experience they have in the building.
Oh, lovely. Yes, I can imagine that a lot of people will find it very difficult to express themselves as well, especially when
totally.
you're
totally, especially
visible is a help. Yes. My second question to that is, do you think then the practitioners need to be trained to gather evidence?
I also, it's a question I also ponder. And I think it's maybe important that an external researcher actually comes in and works with the team. So to avoid people to be, you don't want them to take a position, because if it's internal people that work in the architecture team, they might be biased. So I think for that reason, my answer would be, it's better to have someone coming in, a consultant from the outside, do the research. So yeah, to avoid that conflict of interests. And so yeah, I think someone external should be trained to do that research and be the expert. And yeah, also knowing, practicing architecture myself, how busy you are, and how busy one is always. And I think, it's definitely, I would say, an external researcher.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Philomena. I think as it's a new practice as well, I think people need help to understand how to frame a good question. So Natasha, if I can just go to you very quickly. So my question is that then the I was thinking about the proportion of space and space allocation, and how you have a kind of measuring or a balance that is future-proof, if you like, that sort of maintains the harmony that you hope that you create in your new in projects and environments, that kind of maintains it there for the future. Is there something that can go forward after maybe the architect and the consultants have left?
Yeah, I think ideally there would be an aspect of reviewing if what's supposed to be happening is happening in terms of benefit for people, and if anything needs to change, if there's things, because often you do projects and then you sort of leave and then that's it, you finished, no one's involved afterwards. But actually that's when the project, the life of that place begins, and actually there might be lots of things that haven't been thought about or accounted for, or people's responses are just different to what you'd expect. So I think that key sort of post-occupancy side, but maybe there's a different way of doing it from the way it's done now, but really understanding how people are living in that space and what's working or not. I think it's really important to then feed that back into other designs, but also for that particular place as well. So yeah, I think that's something that's really missing.
Thank you, Natasha. Harry, what a question?
Yes, please. Thank you both very, very much. That was really phenomenally helpful and interesting. And the issue that kept occurring to me as you were both speaking, and in fact as you've been answering Kay's questions just now, is how far have you felt incumbent to manage expectations, and how do you deal with that? What do you do? Is this something, given the very kind of co-creative standpoint that you're thinking of, that you then also feel responsible post-occupancy in terms of, I think you've begun to answer this in your previous responses to Kay, but it was just this thing about that phrase, managing expectations, and where you sit with that, perhaps. Question to either or both of you, please.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, my, yeah, I do definitely, I think it's super critical to assess the outcomes of the design post-occupancy. Also, if you do the pre-occupancy evaluation, it is so critical to then actually see how the design decisions you made based on the pre-occupancy findings, how they actually perform for the end user. I think that's very critical, and that's actually also what I will be doing in my project, in one of my projects. And yeah, I cannot tell yet what, you know, what I will find, but I'm definitely excited about it, and I think it's very critical to do the post-occupancy evaluations.
Yeah,
Sure.
Similarly, I think having those kind of metrics and benchmark and creating data, which doesn't really exist very much, possibly in some studies it does, but in terms of measuring the impacts of buildings on people, that's not really the norm. So that's something I'm starting to do in projects now, but it's having to even got into that stage, it's taken a while of getting clients to sort of say yes to that and see the value. So there's a lot of kind of advocacy involved in championing these new approaches as well. So, and always being open that it is new, so it's not an established form of practice. So there's not much to draw on before.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Jane, you have your hand up.
Is that me, Jane?
That's you, Jane.
Sorry, I'm currently trying to deal with two toddlers at the same time. I thought they're great presentations. Thank you so much for them. I wondered if you could both talk a bit about the forces that prevent this type of design from happening, because of course, if you ask the majority of architects why they got into architecture, I would hope a lot of them would say it's because they care about people and I want the world to be a good place for people to live in. But there's a lot of forces that are preventing them from designing well and preventing them from designing the kind of spaces that you're both exploring. So could you talk a bit about those, and if you've got any strategies to counter them?
Philomena, do you want to start?
So I don't know if I understood everything correctly, but is the question how you get a client to commit, to make the commitment to design better?
It was more broad, actually. It's what are the forces within the world of development and procurement of architecture and the built environment that prevent people from doing this in the first place, or that have led to a world where this is not happening.
Oh, so okay. So what prevents architects from not designing for people, or not putting them at the center of design? yeah, I guess it comes really down to time. There's often, you know, architects often work on tight timelines and also tight budgets, project margins. And I think it really requires a client who is willing to go that step further. And but also in some ways, I think architects can also be a part of kind of illuminating the client, or actually sharing that there's all this research and data that shows how much a space or a design impacts people and their well-being, and in that sense also I think the success of a project. But then also I think on a broader scheme of things, we also need to redefine what a successful project looks like. And I think today success is defined more defined by numbers rather than it is defined by experiences that people have. Yeah, so I think that would be my answer to the question.
Yeah, I think I have a similar experience where sort of until now, really, it's been commercial drivers the first thing, and that the human side or the social side has been like the nice to have, but not really that important. But now there's definitely been a shift where if you can show that actually making places that are good for people are probably quite good for business as well, because people want to spend time there or go there, or they're more attractive, that seems to sort of land with more commercially minded organizations. So I think it's that, you know, there's this idea that making places that are good for people is against profit, but if you can join those things up and make people understand that it's all in everyone's best interest, really, I think that's the key thing that needs to shift, and it's starting to.
And yeah, if I can add one other thing, I think it's also interesting to just look at it from a sustainability perspective, because if we spend resources and build buildings or places that people don't like or don't enjoy to be in, it's in some ways it's a waste of materials and resources as well. So yeah, I think if more people would also look at it in that perspective, from a sustainability resources point of view, I think it could also be helpful.
Thank you. Matthew?
Yeah, hi. Thanks very much, both. Yeah, I'm really glad to have you on the same platform, and it's really been delightful to hear these presentations. I'm really sympathetic to everything that you've been presenting about. Really loved your presentation, Philomena, with the kind of pathway to thinking through these issues. I am going to be slightly devil's advocate here, although I am super sympathetic. I mean, I'm one of those people, I'm going to sound very grouchy, but every time I go to a restaurant, certainly in London, not every time, but I almost always find the table is too high. The chair, you know, you can't hear each other properly. You can't read the menu. It's not human-centered, and yet it's all about food. So it's one of those things. But I'm also interested in the specific concern for an evidence-based base here, and this idea of measuring impact versus measuring opinion. In some ways, you are looking for these complex kinds of measurement, which combine feelings as well as, if you like, facts, and wanting to treat those facts as feelings in a way that is true to human experience. But at the same time, I suppose that this is where I'm being devil's advocate. There is a tendency with this with what you've both said, as if to suggest this is completely new, as if designers haven't been thinking about putting humans at the center of design for a very long time. And I suppose because also I'm a architectural historian theorist, I'm very interested in this idea of theory and in, if you'd like, the literature. If I was to look at almost any innovator in the modern period in the 20th century, I would find a story of an architect and some architects in the tradition in which I've been trained around interpretation, which is architectural phenomenology, a very strong concern for this complex idea of the human response, which is at a crossover between, if you like, the well-being concept and the spirit concept, not spiritual, but how it feels, what it makes you think of, how it makes you dream. So there's a complexity to the issues, which is also the backstory. So in a sense, I think I recognize, Natasha, that you're saying we need this evidence base, but also we have a massive literature, and we could also look for a rethinking of the literature we have. I would have thought a literature review of this tradition in architectural thinking could be very, and I say architectural and design thinking could be very useful and instructive, even around those themes of belonging that Kay was talking about earlier. And I'm thinking even people like Alain de Botton have written about this very, very informatively in a way that I even have given to my students to read. So I'm looking to just slightly complicate the conversation with this question about if we go into these two areas of discussion. Number one, the question of measurement, measuring impact versus measuring opinion. Do you have comments on that? Or the other question, answer either of them or both if you wish. What about the backstory? What about the literature? Aren't there pioneers who we've left out of this story? We've talked mostly about toolkits and processes of measurement and so forth. But what about the pioneers who have actually tried to do this, to create an argument for human-centered design in different ways and through different examples? So that's my comment/question.
Who would like to go first? Natasha, perhaps?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. So on the, okay, I'll tackle measuring impact versus opinion first. And I think that, I suppose there's different ways that I'm thinking about how the effects are being measured, but mostly working in collaboration with people that are specializing in those areas, whether that's an environmental psychologist who would be looking at the more, I suppose, subjective, qualitative side, or I'm working with someone who sort of works at the intersection of neuroscience and design, but works in neuroscience, so that they would use their methods in that, which would be more quantitative. So it'd definitely be a sense of rigor to the way that it's done, if that was what the question was. And then the second part, which is about that kind of architectural background and tradition and history of phenomenology, which is, yeah, it could be a whole presentation in itself in a way, so I haven't really touched on that. But I think the reason why I've been pushing forwards this work is because the mainstream of what's being built doesn't have any of those aspects in it. In terms of, say, when I was working with Brent, the issue was quality of what's being built now and in big scale of it and en masse. So that would be really valuable to kind of link it to all that history of humanism in architecture and sort of the work of Plasma, all these things, and architecture for happiness. But thus far, I've sort of not brought that in, just because it feels like that's not really what's happening in terms of what's being built at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I guess then it's my turn to answer both Matthew's questions. So in terms of the first question, measuring impacts versus opinions, I think we are just really starting to do these kind of evaluations and get this data, and I think it requires really, a longitudinal view on things, and for us to really say with certainty that something has an impact on people, and it's not just an opinion they have. But I think the more data we can have about, or more opinions we can have, then the more robust maybe it becomes. And so the more data we have, then the more we can maybe see patterns where we see that, okay, this actually had an impact, if that makes sense. But I think it's too early to be able to discern between what is an opinion and what is really an impact. But I think the more data we have, the more we can see patterns. But yeah, I think we just need the data, and that is currently just not available. And then the second question, it's interesting because I also thought about this, and there's one chapter in my dissertation that talks about the concept of polyvalence by Hermann Hertzberger. So polyvalence, I find, is very also important, and this idea of flexibility and multifunctionality of a space, because of course you're not only designing for one person, you're designing for a lot of people. And so then there's also this component of thinking about how can you respond to these many different needs and experiences people have when they all come together in one building, and how can a building be responsive to these multiple needs. And so and yeah, I did take polyvalence, I reference it because it's a concept that comes up in architectural literature, but I nowhere find it really in more scholarly research, like outside of architecture. But yeah, so I do agree, Matthew, you bring up a very great point. And I totally think that we should give more attention to all this amazing like literature that's written by architecture historians. And yeah, it is definitely overseen today.
Thank you, Philomena. That's a nice response. Thank you, Natasha, too. I was just going to add to that. So when we're waiting for the data to pile up so that you can understand if your environments have been successful, is there a kind of sense of a bell curve about it, that it doesn't just happen, that it's the people have also got to acclimatize into their new environments, or the new how the new places are organized, so that there's a kind of build up? And then in that kind of bell curve, I mean, do you need in those kind of placemaking kind of ideas, do you need to put an initiator in there, some sort of thing that kind of starts off, so somebody can put their toe in the water, you know, so that they start making their communities? Natasha, perhaps?
Yeah. Do you mean sort of someone that's sort of bringing people together in terms of creating community, or?
It's kind of like one of those, you've designed the space, it looks, you know, extremely inclusive, and you've got lots of biophilia, you've got the trees, and you've got the park benches, and you've got, you know, a nice range of flexible spaces and places for people to go. But is there a sense where sometimes people are worried about making the first step, you know, to produce that nice community? And so therefore, do you then have to work with those people to kind of initiate, if you like, scenarios? So then it starts the community kind of gelling together. Or do you think the space should do it, perhaps?
I think it's definitely both, and something I'm working on a project in Brixton where we're hoping to do it with a lot of community involvement through the design process, but also as part of that kind of co-creation of what this new place will be involving local organisations to shape, what organisations are taking ownership of community spaces, and very much creating a sort of ecosystem around how the use will be, but drawing from people that are there already and already doing things, whether that's kind of organisations that work with young people or a sort of soup kitchen. So it's about bringing together that right mix and shaping it according to the expertise that's within that local community. Because as people that, if you're not from that place, how will you know what's going to work best? So that's really critical. And then they can take it on and sort of steward that place into the future as well. So giving that real sense of co-creation and ownership, I think, is really key.
Great. Philomena?
Yeah, I think you're like saying a little bit, and or what I can hear is that, yeah, it's not possible to force people to come together, and it's not possible to really force on them to like become a community, like just give them all like the prettiest space, and then just expect that a community will be built, and therefore I think it is important to evaluate pre-occupancy, what the context is, and what their expectations are, what they want to experience, and then based on that, choose the design responses. But yeah, I think it's not possible to force anything on anyone, and I think, yeah, it's we have to be, we shouldn't be naive, and I think then also designing spaces that are flexible, so that maybe everyone can find what they're specifically looking for, and make design spaces in a way that doesn't force a certain behavior on them, is also important. Yeah, so these are my thoughts.
Thank you, Philomena. We just have a comment in the chat from Timothy. Says it's always been struck by the way children can turn any physical environment into a magical place. There's an overlay of permissiveness and stewardship that makes a place and cannot be driven by the design qualities alone. And now he's just added, it seems that design needs to break out of the narrow production of perfect environments co-created for otherwise, and into an ongoing collective making and remaking that recognizes the reality of evolution to meet new needs and imaginations beyond the expectations of design professionals. Yes, thank you, Timothy. Matthew, do you have any more questions?
Yeah, well, obviously I have a million more questions, but I think that Tim has made a good point in the chat about this understanding the limits of design. But I recognize also that what both our speakers are doing is promoting a sort of a change in the mindset. And certainly, Natasha, you have a lot of experience in this field, and you are talking about also trying to change the conversation a bit. I think with the best will in the world. I mean, I think when I was asking about past heroes and heroines, Philomena, you mentioned Hermann Hertzberger, and absolutely, he's a great model of someone who has put these questions at the heart of his design ethos and teaching ethos, before some of us were born, not before I was born, but anyway. But the other person who just came to mind suddenly to me is Yasmin Lari, who recently got the RIBA Gold Medal. Of course, she is, her whole outlook is absolutely about empathy and care. And very much she is now a role model held out by the RIBA. So we have to understand that, notwithstanding the fact that aspects of this approach are very new, it does have a history. And I think acknowledging that history and telling a story about how, the contribution we may make today fits into a credible history is quite important from that scholarly side as well, bearing in mind that this is not the same thing as changing practice. So just maybe some comments there. But yeah, no, I think I'm done, Kay. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions from the people online? Doesn't seem to be. I can't see any at the moment. I'm looking. Okay. So how many minutes? We've got 7 minutes left. Is there is there anything else that you would like to add? And maybe some goals, future goals, where you might be aiming towards, whether it's just particular projects or whether it is a kind of policy change, from a kind of very normal part of, government and planning or whatever. Is there something that would be a future goal? Natasha, perhaps?
Yeah, I think for me there's quite a strong push to try and change policy, because that's sort of where I've started, and see if that can happen more widely. And I think also the points that Matthew's raised about that kind of scholarly history and that context, I think raising awareness of that and where this all sits within that, I think is really important as well. So it's absolutely not something that's come out of nowhere, but making people aware that this is fundamentally what architecture's been about for a long time. Yes,
absolutely. Philomena?
I think an immediate goal for me is to really continue to develop the framework and develop the methodology of pre and post occupancy evaluation, and finesse the surveys and the questions I'm asking, and really work on that. And then I'm hoping in the long term that I can maybe build this database and see on a grand scheme of things, maybe patterns that show up, and based on which we can maybe identify certain user groups. And another idea I have about the future, but I mean, all these are very long-term goals and they require a lot of research and development. But another something I've been thinking about for long term, is to maybe create a accessible sort of open library or common knowledge database, where architecture, it's like the one go-to place where architects can go to and find these reference projects and find this data. Because I also think that like I don't know where to look. I have to go on Google and kind of search for this evidence, and there's no really good evidence kind of knowledge database currently available. So, or anyone who's in this presentation today, I mean, maybe that's something that they want to look into. But I think that would be maybe also a great future project. So a database where I can also share my experiences and best practices. Yeah.
I think that's really great, and it's totally ambitious. Of course, it's super ambitious, isn't it? Because it can be as big as it needs to be. It's how many different types of spaces and analysis can you gather, and I guess there's all the factors all the time that will input into those projects. It's be like the climate change, or it'll be poverty, or all these kind of things will have you make the data different from area to area, and so you need all of those factors inside your data. So wonderful. Thank you very much, both of you. Matthew, would you like to finish with a word or two?
Sure. Yeah, no, thanks so much, Kay, for chairing, and thank you everyone for coming. We had a great turnout online across time zones, which is also terrific. I did also just want to mention, because I was doing some work at Cambridge University recently, where Flora Samuel recently took on took over the professorship, which has been held by a series of influential thinkers and designers. Her work on the social value of design, which was at the heart of our IBA policy when she was head of research there, was very influential. And there's a major project that was produced out of that called the Social Value of Design, which I think would be a very good database and source for you, Philomena. And I'm sure Natasha is familiar with it. But there are a number of resources where people have been doing this. There's the fantastic work that Libby Burton used to do up at Warwick at the Wellbeing in the Sustainable Environments Research Centre for a number of years, so before she tragically died. So I think it's a really important field. I think it's really important that we recognise it's not we're not at the beginning of it. It's something we can plug into and use those resources, but really exciting to have it at the heart of one of our sessions tonight, because it's really very much at the heart of what we care about in architecture and design here at London Met. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. It's been a lovely presentation tonight. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. There we are.
Thank you also to the organizers.
Goodbye.
Yes, that's Matthew. Bye now.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Kay.
Everyone.